In a world overflowing with information, the ability to discern truth from illusion is more crucial than ever. Now, whether we are evaluating news, whether we are seeking personal decision, making personal decision, and discovering spiritual insights, these pramana or modes of knowledge are very relevant, especially with all the bombardment of misinformation amongst the information that we are seeing, media bias, AI generated content. So these 6 modes of knowledge are not just some abstract philosophical ideas, but are very practical tools for our modern life. Whether in scientific decision making, whether it's about gaining more awareness on media literacy, or any pursuit. Understanding these praman or mode of knowledge allows us to engage with the world in a more meaningful and intelligent and conscious way. True knowledge is not just about gathering facts. One can find endless amount of information online, but true knowledge is about clarity. It's about ability to see beyond appearances, and that is rooted in awareness. So these modes of knowledge or praman help us navigate reality and understand the difference between truth and false information. Now, different tradition does interpret these modes of knowledge with their own slight nuances. In Siddha Tantra, we know all these modes of knowledge to be based or grounded in what is known as Pratibha. Now, Pratibha is a spontaneous, direct knowing, and this direct knowing is the pure form of wisdom, Shuddha Vidya, and that is the very light of the self, or Alakh Niranjan, one can say. And all these 6 modes of knowledge are based on that. And by refining these modes of knowledge, one goes beyond the conditioned mind and knowledge and into direct recognition of the truth. And that is the path of Shiva, and that is the path of Siddha Tantra. It's important to understand the nuance here when we talk about Pratibha. It can roughly be translated as intuition. There is a big difference between the true intuition and the subconscious conditioning or deep-seated samskara or patterns of thinking. Now, because these deep-seated patterns of thinking in subconscious may seem very automatic, including our what we call as a gut feeling. Now, the gut feeling, now we know that it is influenced by various factors, including even the gut microbiomes. And the subconscious pattern has a lot to do with our past life sanskar, or gathered information for a very long time and internalizing that. Now, the true intuition has another dimension which is different and distinct from these subconscious automatic thinking. These 6 modes of knowledge are very valid way of understanding the world. However, each mode is also susceptible to some sort of cognitive bias that can delude us. So it's very important to understand this mode of knowledge and also understand how, if is not devised or implemented properly, can lead to cognitive bias and false understanding. For example, one of the basic mode of knowledge is the direct perception, knowing by seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, so on, through the direct sensory experience. When you see a red apple with your own eyes, then you know that okay, it is a red apple. But it can also lead to some sort of perception bias also. We often tend to see what we expect as well. Often it also involves some sort of unintentional blindness also. When we are focused on one aspect of thing, we may become oblivious or miss detail somewhere else. It can also lead to fulfilling one's own idea as well, some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy you can think, or you can think about it as some sort of confirmation bias as well, where you are only getting those sensory experiences, you're only focused on knowing those things which actually confirms your already existing idea about something, your own confirmation bias, pre-existing ideas. And that is very much happening in today's world, especially on social media, where algorithms are deciding what feed, what information you see, and based on your past pattern, you are already established your bias, and the algorithm of social media is feeding you more and more of that information, leading to more and more of your own confirmation bias, and that is not the correct mode of knowledge. And it can be one's own idea about things also. Two persons are observing the same scene happening, but each person is focused subconsciously into what that specific person considers most relevant. So that is why one can have different understanding of reality as well. So when we hear the next sensational headline in the media, one should ask, is it really true? Have I seen this with my own eyes? Is there any supporting evidence? And so on and so forth. One should have this kind of questioning attitude as well. Then another kind of, or another mode of knowledge, of the sixth mode of knowledge, is the inference. How we understand through our own logical reasoning from observing something. And for example, you notice there is smoke coming out of my dhuna, so you think that okay, since there is smoke coming out, there must be fire. That is inference, and that is a valid mode of knowledge. However, it can also lead to some sort of delusion or biases. For example, one can overtly generalize something. Based by looking at some aspect of something, one can make a very broader conclusion which may not hold true. It can also lead to somebody searching for some evidence in a way that all confirms one's own hypothesis as well. For example, very commonly one talks about correlation versus causation, that just because some things are happening together or are related, it doesn't mean that one is causing the other. So one should be careful when one uses inference to not be susceptible to these kind of delusions that can creep in even though the mode of knowledge is valid. It can be anything. You see somebody or a set of people wearing the same kind of shoes and they are slipping on a surface. Then you might conclude that it is the shoe which is making them all slip. And you may even ignore other factors about how is the floor itself slippery, or you are focused on everybody wearing the same kind of shoe, so you might infer in an incorrect way as well. So one has to be careful for that as well. Then the other kind of or other mode of knowledge is the Shabd-Pramana, or learning or taking words of trustworthy sources. It can be scriptures if you are religious, it can be subject matter experts, scientists, your favorite social media influencer, or your news channel of your own sensitivity. Now, when one thinks about this mode of knowledge, yes, if the person of authority who is giving this information is trustworthy, then for sure it is a very valid mode of knowledge. But it can also be susceptible to different forms of biases which can lead to delusions. For example, even though a person has credibility in one field and that person you think is authoritative, and that person makes a comment about something that he doesn't know about, but you prima facie believe that person to be trustworthy and believe that. So even though it's a valid mode of knowledge, but you may conclude wrongly if the person is making some information or claim about some unrelated domain. Just because the person knows about one thing, that doesn't mean the person knows about everything. And this often happens especially when it comes to celebrities. You know, like person from Hollywood or Bollywood who are very good actors in their own field, very successful actors, and maybe very good looking, and that also plays some part. And you have seen them in various movies, so you develop some sort of a mental relation with them that, okay, yeah, I like this person, must be saying nice things, I trust this person. And that person starts to talk about something in politics or science, climate change, or next breakthrough. It could be anything. And just because you think that person has some sort of credibility, you start believing anything that person says, then that would be wrong. And of course, a person can have talent in many things. There is no saying that a Hollywood actor or actress is not having good grasp on the political or the scientific breakthroughs. It can happen as well. So one has to understand it based on time, place and circumstances. Then another mode of knowledge is through comparison. By identifying something familiar and comparing it with something unfamiliar, one tries to understand what is unfamiliar. For example, if you see a new animal, then you try to think about, okay, what do I know about similar kind of animals, 4 legs, mammals, so on and so forth, and you try to categorize very broadly based on similarity and dissimilarity. For example, you see an animal run through and you know that you have a cat and you know how kitties look. So you'll say that, okay, I know cat and I see this animal which looks like a cat, so this new animal must be cat as well. Very valid, very straightforward way of knowing truth about anything. But in the nuances, even this can lead to delusion or wrong understanding. For example, you see some functionality in your, say, phone, mobile telephone or your smartphone, and you compare it with some other mobile phone which has a different kind of feature. Maybe it's running on Android and you know about iPhone. Just because you are familiar with one way of working in one kind of mobile phone does not make it the same in the other kind of mobile phone. So sometimes similar things or comparison between similarity and dissimilarity have to be also taken in the context, whether it is even comparable or not, or on what basis one is comparing. Then another form of knowledge is sort of presumptions or postulating something, what is known as Arthapati. Now, in this, one tries to infer something must be true to resolve some sort of apparent contradiction one sees or make sense of a given situation. For example, if you have a friend and that friend claims they haven't eaten anything in 2 days, let's say, and you see that friend again skipping dinner. So you might postulate that they must have secretly eaten earlier, or if the person is a practitioner, you may think that okay, he must be doing some long fasting. Valid mode of knowledge, but it can also lead to some problem, especially when one tries to create an explanation that fits very limited set of observation, and when one tries to fit something forcefully and misses other plausible explanations, then that can lead to delusion. For example, the friend that has not eaten for 2 days, let's go back to that example. Now, if you conclude that okay, that friend must have secretly eaten or is earlier or is doing fasting, that may still be valid. But let's say that you are an emotional person and has some sort of emotional bias towards that person, and then when you hear that person is saying that he hasn't eaten for 2 days and is still skipping meal, and then you start spiraling in your head about he must be lying, he must be hiding something, so on and so forth without any evidence, then that is a delusion that arises when one takes this mode of knowledge without understanding its nuances about the context. Then another mode of knowledge is when we try to know something when something is not present, the Anupalabdhi. You are looking for the key. When you don't see the key on the table, then you realize that okay, since I always keep it on the table, and now that the key is not on the table, the key must be missing. So since the key was missing from the table, absence or Anupalabdhi, you conclude that the key is missing. Valid way of understanding things, if that is the way it has always been, and that is the most common place that you always put or always put invariably. However, even this can lead to some sort of cognitive bias and delusion in mind. People may overestimate or underestimate something like this, like they don't find something somewhere and they overestimate or underestimate without any logical reason. It can even lead to some sort of tunnel vision about something, that just because it should be there and it is not there. For example, something is lost. How do you conclude that? Just because it is not in its usual place, you conclude that okay, since it is not in its usual place, it must be lost. Now this could be oversimplifying or too much reading into situation. Maybe you kept it somewhere else. So like that, all these 6 modes of knowledge are valid, but one should be careful not to fall into some sort of cognitive bias or conclude wrongly about them. Now these modes of knowledge are very important, a very basic basis of all forms of understanding, whether it is scientific understanding or any kind of any kind of understanding of situations. All scientific reasoning also rely on these things. You infer something, you observe, you do experiments to observe, and then you infer from that. Why? To test a hypothesis. And all 3 are valid way of knowing that we talked earlier. They are for part of the 6 modes of knowledge. Now we are living in the age of AI. Now AI works with pattern recognition, and pattern recognition and inference is even more relevant today in the AI age as it was in earlier times. So all these modes of knowledge are very important modes of knowledge, and one should understand these modes of knowledge so that one can use these modes of knowledge to filter out misinformation, filter out delusions, and come to the right understanding of the world. The role of media, the Shabd, one of the mode of knowledge, is perhaps one of the heavily relied on in this time when there's so much social media and news that's bombarding with online information, articles and videos and so on and so forth. Now, all of them may not be reliable. So, it is very important for us to differentiate between authentic knowledge and manipulative narratives. So, next time before sharing a viral post, one should ask if the source is credible. Is it fact or is it merely an opinion? So on and so forth. Even one should be having the understanding of the nuances of our subconscious conditioning or the Samskara, so that one does not fall into some sort of cognitive bias and have a distorted understanding of reality. Also, one should be understanding one's own subconscious Samskara, and very easily one can fall prey to judging the present situation based on the previous experiences of trauma, and that kind of fear-based conditioning can create a very distorted version of reality. So it's very important to be able to understand these modes of knowledge and how our mind can play tricks with us when we are trying to navigate the world and trying to understand the truth. Now, when we talk about all these different modes of knowledge, we don't talk about intuition or Pratibha, because the Pratibha or the intuition is the very basis of these modes of knowledge. It's true that in some cases we do take Pratibha as one mode of knowledge. However, that Pratibha is very different from intuition also. One should understand this difference as well. That the direct realization or the direct knowing of the inner light or the truth which is rooted in pure consciousness is very different from the gut feeling or the understanding based on often seen patterns and making automatic conclusions. That is very working of the subconscious as well. A yogi realizing the truth, having a direct perception in a heightened state of awareness, even samadhi, is very different from the subconscious pattern recognition. And often when one talks about having an intuition about something, one should question oneself that is it intuition or is it one's own subconscious bias. Now, when one develops this intuition or pratibha, that aids us in all different modes of knowledge as well. For example, if one has the direct knowing and developed intuition of the Alakh Niranjan inner light by sadhana, then one can instantly come to a conclusion rather than going step by step through logical reasoning. In inference, intuition can create a shortcut in logical step. It can help us overcome emotional bias and learned pattern by seeing through it, different biases of the mind. A guru's word can spark direct realization and awaken the disciples' inner light that aligns with the teaching. Our guessing mechanism, how we guess, is also dependent on whether we are guided by our inner light or whether we are running based on our own subconscious patterns. By recognizing the absence of something, can also be immediate, sort of an intuitive insight when it is guided by clarity. Being aware and reflecting in heightened awareness, observing one's thoughts, feelings, and subtle assumptions can help us recognize these bias and these bias driven perceptions of the world. Various practices like meditation that we do and the Siddha Tantra arts that we follow, these foster a sense of clarity so that one can distinguish and differentiate the true insight, the Pratibha, from this subconscious conditioning as well. So, this true intuition is the source of all modes of knowledge, and it is ever present with grace, sometimes experienced as the aha moment as well, where a scientific discovery is made instantaneously by the solution or the knowledge just dawning upon, a creative pursuit coming to a fruition naturally, effortlessly. The other thing that is also, I remember, is that when we were learning Jyotish, now Jyotish is often translated as astrology, where one looks into the planetary alignment and so on and so forth based on the stars, constellation and the grahas. But that is a very reduced understanding of Jyotish. The astrology is a very caricatured, even a reduced version of Jyotish. Originally, when we learn Jyotish, especially in Siddha Tantra, we think of it or we learn of it as the science of light, science of inner light and wisdom. This is what a Jyotish even means. The Jyotish literally means this science of light, sort of. And this illumination or the inner wisdom is what one uses when one does Jyotish. And in that, some Siddhas did use some planetary positions for those time, place, and circumstances and constellation. However, now Jyotish is merely reduced to astrology. But when we learned Tantra Jyotish in the Siddha tradition, then we learned how the universe connects, the outside universe as microcosm connects with our individual inner universe microcosm, and how the mysteries of the inner self reflects outside. And in Tantra Jyotish, when we learned, we did different ways. Like for example, you might even find it strange or unheard of, or if you're familiar with some shamanic tradition, then it will resonate more with that, where we learned Jyotish, then we learned about mustard seeds, reading Prashna, 64 yoginis, 64 yogini Prashna, the dices, and just connecting with the inner light and the higher consciousness, divinity, and then understanding the reality in that light, and not merely by the planetary position that Jyotish or astrology has been reduced to now. And that is what intuition is about. Developing that intuition is about connecting with that inner light, and with the wisdom of the inner light, the true intuition or pratibha, one gains understanding of the world. And with this true intuition, one refines these various 6 modes of knowledge as well, and gain a deeper understanding and protect oneself from being subject to cognitive bias and various delusion that can come.